Are you a children's book author who has thought about what it would be like to be traditionally published? Maybe you have a Christian children's book or even just a wholesome book that you would really love to have published by one of the big publishers that are out there. It's not easy, and most of the authors that I speak to are self-published. But I'm blessed today to have Chelsea Tornetto on the Coffee and Kidlit Show, and she is an author, published several books published actually, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about that. But we'll be talking about her book, God Made You Too. Chelsea, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you on.
Hi, Travis. It's good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for anyone who is watching this show for the very first time, the Coffee and Kidlit Show is just sort of a children's book author interview style show where I talk to other authors about their books and what inspired them. And we kind of get into some of the tips along the way and how they publish their books. And so it's just kind of a fun show. And if you are watching live, please leave comments, ask questions. We're here to answer those. And if you're watching the replay, you can do the same and we'll try to reply as soon as we can. But I'm also taking submissions for 2024. So if you are interested in being an author on the show, you can go to launchmissioncreative.com/submissions and just give me the details for your book and yourself, and we can look into having you as a guest on the show. So now, Chelsea, give us a little bit of a background, who you are. Tell us about your family. Just tell us all the gory details.
Okay. Well, I am located in Missouri. My husband, Mike, is a teacher at the local high school. I taught for 17 years. I taught world geography to 7th graders. So that was my passion and calling for many, many years. And I have 2 kids, Tessa and Milo, 13 and 9. And I just kind of started writing children's books as a creative outlet a few years ago, and love it, and was able to transition from the classroom last year, at the end of last year, to still teaching, but just teaching adults instead of 7th graders. So now I get to teach how to get published and how to write. And it's a really great combination of my 2 loves. So.
Yeah, and I know you are with At Home Author, which is sort of a network or what do you call it? A business that coaches.
We kind of talk about it as like an author education company, but it's basically just coaching and support for anybody who wants to get published, whether you want to go traditional and sell your story to a publishing company, or if you want to self-publish. We have the 3 of us, Vicki, Brittany, and I, have done both routes, and so we just kind of guide people on that journey, because it's a lot. It's overwhelming. There's a lot of information out there, and you can get lost really quick in the craziness of the internet. And so we're just trying to kind of simplify the process for everybody.
Yeah, and the idea that all 3 of you have sort of different perspectives on the publishing journey, traditional and self-published, and Vicki is an agent, and so there's all these different ways of looking at the whole concept. Really makes for a great team. We talked a little bit about that off stage. So
I feel like when I started out, I didn't even know the difference between traditional and self-publishing. And so I think a lot of people come to it that way. They're like, well, I know I want this book to exist, but I don't really know, how to go about it. And so, I think that's a strength, is that we can kind of help them not only do the process, but first figure out which way you want to go. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were a world geography teacher for several years. You said that was your calling, your passion. How did you get into that? What sparked?
Oh gosh, I wanted to teach since I was I mean, I've never wanted to do anything else. Like when I was in kindergarten, when I was a kid, I had the teacher play set. You know, that was the only thing I ever thought about doing. And world geography, I think, I don't really know. I started off in college, my major was language arts, and just kind of really liked the history classes even more than the language arts classes. And so kind of did a double major and just landed in a world geography job. A lot of times, you know, you don't get to pick exactly where you end up. You just kind of get, here's your teaching job. And luckily, I really loved it. I loved that coming from a small town myself, and then teaching in a small rural area, getting to show kids the world, you know, in an area where they maybe don't have as much diversity or as much exposure to people from different countries, to kind of get them excited to learn about those places and then maybe travel when they get older. So yeah, that was what I loved about it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic because, you know, I also kind of grew up in a small town, and at that time there weren't too many people leaving. It was
Yeah.
just you didn't leave the state of North Carolina, and especially not the U.S. And you know,
Yeah.
here I am. I've traveled to several countries. I live in a different continent now, and you know,
Yeah.
it just really broadens your whole.
Life has so many blessings that come along with it. And so I didn't approach it like that, but more just like, this is so interesting and fascinating. And look at all the places that you could go someday, and still come back home. You know, like we're not telling you you need to leave forever, but just get interested in places. And I think that helps as adults for us to, you know, vote and know what's going on in the world and just be educated. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. So walk us through sort of that transition from teaching to writing children's books. How did that happen?
my first published book was not a children's book. It was a instructional strategies book that I took all of I have a particular vocabulary strategy that I used a lot in my classroom, called connection cards. It's basically just like word sorts where they would sort different words on the desk and make connections between them. And Scholastic does not accept submissions from unagented authors except for in their instructional resource department. And
Oh,
I kind of
interesting.
found that out and was like, oh, well, you know, I love to write and I've got tons of resources. So I wrote a proposal and they accepted that. And so that was actually my first book was with Scholastic. It was called Conquering Content Vocabulary. And so that kind of, I think up until that point, being a published author sounded fictional to me. It sounded like
Yeah.
getting into the NFL or something, you know, like, I don't know. I thought it was crazy. And so I never really pursued it. But after that, I was like, oh, well, you know, if a regular old teacher like me can get published by Scholastic, then maybe I could do children's books, even though I knew that that was way more competitive. It's way harder to get into the kidlit world because I don't know, there's just a lot more competition there. So I actually decided to go to a retreat. Being a teacher, I knew I wanted to learn. You know, first you have to learn what you're doing. And so I went to a retreat that was hosted by Highlights Magazine, which, if you're
Yeah.
familiar, in the US, they're like a huge kidlit magazine. And they posted this thing about picture books. And I went and learned a ton and kind of decided, okay, I'm going to do this. And met a lot of people there. The great thing about Highlights too is sort of like At Home Author. They had 3 teachers there at that retreat who had done both self and traditional publishing. And so I learned a lot about, you know, the options and decided that at the time, being a teacher full time with 2, my kids were real young. I was like, okay, I can't self publish. I just don't have the bandwidth for, you know, hiring designers and illustrators and marketing and starting a business, which is essentially what self-publishing is sometimes. And so I decided I was going to go traditional. And so I started querying agents, and it took me about 9 months to get my agent, and then about another, I don't know, 6 to 8 months to sell my first book. So now here I am.
Yeah. And I know that it can be a bit of a unicorn to get traditionally published. It doesn't happen for most people. So congratulations, by the way, on that.
Thank you.
Not only for the children's books, but also the educational book with Scholastic. That's quite a feat. So tell us about God Made You Too. What was the inspiration behind this particular book?
So I actually saw a painting by a company called Natural Life, and they're just like I think they're like a female clothing company, and they have home decor and stuff like that. But the painting said something along the lines of, "Isn't it amazing that the same God that made mountains and valleys and all these amazing things also thought that the world needed you?" And it's essentially the theme of the book. And I just really loved the painting and thought it would be a great message for kids if you made it kid friendly. And so that was kind of the goal with this particular story.
And it kind of, I'm just showing some of the spreads from the book now. It just kind of really walks through almost the creation story, and relating it to how God
and
made.
I didn't purposefully follow the creation story. Like I don't know that it is like in the right order or anything like that. But yeah, the idea is different areas of God's creation, and then just reminding the child and the reader that they're part of that awesome creation too. So yeah, and the artist Kimberly Barnes did an amazing job. This is why I love, in traditional publishing, you don't get to choose your illustrator, and a lot of people are really hesitant about that. I love it because these publishers have the finances to hire these super talented illustrators, and I wrote the poem and didn't even realize that a lot of the words I had used were art words. Painted sky, sculpted mountains, and it was just kind of a subconscious thing. And she took that and ran with it in the illustrations. And so the illustrations all sort of look like these beautiful, art projects. There's like splash paint colors and glitter, and it's really beautiful. So
it really is. She did a fantastic job. I think there's a lot of motion, and a lot of the colors are just very vibrant and really nicely done. I like the style. So is there a particular line or scene in the book that you're just really proud of, that you really love?
I really like, and I should have it in front of me, it's the painted sky, the against the painted sky line was my favorite. And I think can you find that page?
Yeah, I'm looking for it here.
I have a
Oh yeah, with the mountains.
Right? Yeah, that's it. Yep. There it is. The greatest sculptor of them all, who molded mountains high, who carved the cliffs above the clouds against a painted sky. I just think the rhythm of that line and the imagery was one of my favorites. So,
well, I'll just point out mine. I'm going to skip through a little quick here to this one. I love this scene. The God who gave each heart a song, each hand a gift to share, the one whose purpose guides each path, who hears each whispered prayer, the God who made billions of souls, each with great things to do, gave you a light that's meant to shine. That's why he made you too. Especially that line, gave you a light that's meant to shine. That one really, really struck me. I like that a lot.
I love the way she got all the different types of kids in there too. I think every kid who
Yeah,
reads the book can kind of find themselves on that page, at least in some way. So I thought that was kind of fun.
right, right. Yeah. Now, this book is published with Worthy Kids,
Yep.
that's an imprint under Hachette.
Yep.
Um, Tell us a bit about what it was like signing on with them. Of course, you have an agent, but
Mhm.
kind of walk us through the whole process for those of us who may be more interested or more experienced with self-publishing, what it took to be published with Worthy Kids.
So my agent at the time was Melissa Richson, and I've since I'm with Storm now with a different agent, but Melissa sent this out to, she kind of did it in rounds of like 10 publishers at a time. And I think we got through about 20 or 30 and had some interest from Worthy. And it's just such a slow, it's maddeningly slow process. You know, like they'll send you an email and say, we really love this. We're going to take it to our acquisitions team because something that about traditional publishing that a lot of people don't realize is that it's not this one person sitting in an office who falls in love with your book and the decision is made. That one person takes it to a team who then has to approve it. And then there's another team that has, their sales team needs to approve it. And so that whole process for every publisher is different, but with Worthy, it took a long, long time. Several
Now, is
months.
it the same with finding an agent, or are you
Yeah.
pitching it
So
to one agent and they make the choice, or are they also sort of pitching to a team, acquisitions team amongst
So
themselves?
with an agent, my agent was at the time very small. It was just like her and one other person at the agency. And so she had, she could pick whoever she wants to represent. And so that is less of an approval process. It's more of a one-to-one, I like your work, I'm going to help you sell it. So
Okay.
that's much less that way. And it's kind of up to each agent what they can handle. Some agents are part-time, some agents are full-time, so it just depends on if they think, I've got room on my schedule to take one more person on or not. So that's a little bit simpler. But anyway, Worthy really liked it. Eventually, they sent me a contract. And from that point, after the contract, I probably didn't hear from them for like 6 to 8 months. And they sent me black and white sketches of the illustrations already laid out, everything, and they're just beautiful. Like they send it to you and say, do you have any feedback or any questions or any problems? Ultimately, they get the final call, but if I had seen anything, I would have told them, but they were beautiful. I literally couldn't come up with anything to do differently. And then I didn't see it again until it was full color. So it's very much a hands-off, process with traditional publishing, which was exactly what I needed because, like I said, I was teaching full-time with 2 young kids. So
Well, I'm actually surprised that they even sent you the sketches, because I
yeah,
was just kind of assuming that you just kind of sign off and that's it. And
every publisher
hopefully you
is
see what you
different. Every publisher is a little bit different, but I
Yeah.
have gotten sketches from both of my first 2 books. And they do take some feedback. Like on my other book, I didn't really have any feedback on God Made You Too, but on my other book, there were like a couple little things like, oh, I wanted the little girl to be standing in a different place or whatever. And they accepted some of that feedback. So I think it just depends on each publisher. They're different. So
Mhm. Yeah. Now, I am familiar a little bit with Worthy Kids because
mhm.
of Kirk Cameron, who
Yeah.
signed on with Worthy. And of course, he's been in the news a lot over the past year or so with his children's book and everything that has happened with his library visits and all of
Yeah.
that. But Worthy Kids, they seem to take on a very specific um, group of authors, and of course, it's a Christian publisher. So, if you could just kind of speak a little bit to what the difference is, maybe between pitching a Christian book to publishers and maybe pitching it to a mainstream publisher or mainstream book? Is there any difference at all?
Having an agent, I don't see a lot of that because they do that for me. But
That's
I will
true,
say, like, I had a manuscript a couple years ago that was subbed out to different places. It was a Christian manuscript, and we got interest from a particular publisher who loved it. They were very enthusiastic about it. They took it to their team and were getting ready to make an offer, and they asked my agent if they could learn a little bit more about me and my background. And so we sent them, like, a little bit about me. I'm Catholic. My kids go to a Catholic school, Southeast Missouri, like, blah, blah, blah. And they immediately nixed everything because I'm Catholic. So, and they were a Protestant leaning, publisher, and just were not interested, and said that I didn't match with their goals and vision and whatever. And so I do think that in the Christian, well, and that's not any really different than other trade publishers. Your background matters. They're going to go stalk your social media and see if you and your values, I guess, match theirs. And so, there is some of that in the Christian publishing world because there's so many different groups of Christianity. So I was a little surprised at that because the book itself obviously had nothing specific to any one group of Christian, religions, but that happens. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. You would think they would focus more on the story itself than the author's background or whatever. But I guess, if they're thinking about future books and what might come up in, different beliefs systems or whatever. Yeah.
And I think sadly, I think some people just have, they have to think about their audience. And so certain audience members maybe just wouldn't buy a book from someone who is of a group that they don't agree with. So, you just kind of roll with it and keep going, and know too that probably means they weren't a good fit for you. You probably wouldn't have had the best experience there as an author. And so, it's kind of like dating. You got to find the right match. So.
Right. Now, of course, you don't really have to deal with that so much with self-publishing, except for maybe finding an illustrator that kind of matches the same values and beliefs, or an editor that does the same. But I know we talked a little bit about at-home author having different perspectives of the publishing journey. So can you speak a little bit about the sort of the difference between those two platforms, self-publishing versus being able to have your books traditionally published?
Yeah. So I love to talk about this with new clients at Home Author because it's such an important thing to think about up front, both in terms of what you are capable of doing financially and time-wise, but also so that you get where you want to go. Like, people need to kind of be real with themselves about what their goals are. So I always talk about self-publishing as more of a business. If you're starting a business to sell a product, and it really does take, you are the owner of that business. And so you're hiring your illustrator independently. You're hiring your editors. You're hiring your book designers. You're in charge of marketing. Distribution is a challenge because a traditional publisher will send your book out to all the Barnes and Nobles, and self-publishing, you're on your own to do that. But you get tons more agency in what the book looks like and in exactly what you want it to do as a book. And so that's really empowering, especially because, creative people tend to write books. And so if you're a true creative, you want your hand in all of that. And so that is the appeal of self-publishing. And then traditional publishing is like, you kind of have to have a thick skin because there is so much rejection, like Self-publishing, there's no rejection. Literally anybody can produce a book. And in traditional, rejection is just part of the game. I mean, you try to get an agent, you're going to get rejected maybe several hundred times. Then they're going to send your story out and it's going to get rejected again. And so you kind of have to really have a lot of patience and determination and confidence to go with the traditional route. And what I've learned as I've gotten older and gotten into it is that they're both doable. Like I said, I used to think that like getting a book published was like winning the lot. Like nobody would do that. You know, it was impossible to get a book published. That was like for famous people. But they're both totally doable. It's just more of I feel like traditional publishing is you're playing the long game. You're gradually building your skills and gradually kind of building those connections. And then self-publishing is a little bit faster. It can be a little bit faster because you are in charge of the timeline. So there's just so many things to consider as far as your personality and, you know, whether you have the funds to hire an illustrator or not. So lots to consider. And you can do both. You don't have to. That's the other thing I think is people think once you make that decision, you're stuck. And that's not necessarily the case. Now, you probably aren't going to get a traditional deal on a book that's been self-published, but your next book could be traditionally published or, you know, or vice versa.
If it's a sequel or, you know, part of a series, can you go from self-published to traditionally published with?
You could. I think it would be rare. I feel like that would be hard. But it's possible. Yeah. Especially if the first book sold really well. I went to a conference not too long ago and the agents and editors, publishers there were talking about how people tend to think, oh, I'm going to self-publish, see how it goes, and then I'll try traditional. And they said the problem with that is that even if you self-publish a book, those sales numbers are forever. So like they will forever have to pitch, like, so your next book, let's say you get an agent and they're going to go pitch it and you feel like it's your first traditionally published book, but to the industry, it's your second if you've already self-published one. And so they're going to go pull those sales numbers. So if you just like popped something up on Amazon and it sold 10 copies,
yeah, that
follows you forever, you know? So, I think that that's the only thing you have to consider in making, you know, choosing your path. So you can go both ways, but you do kind of make it more difficult for yourself if you change your mind halfway through. So
one of the biggest arguments that I hear for self-publishing versus traditional publishing is you have to already have an audience to get traditionally published. You have to, like you said, you have to be a celebrity or you have to be an influencer or somebody that has a large audience already, because that's what publishers are looking for. Did you already have an audience in place, or how did that conversation even come up?
So what I found and what I've heard from lots of people in the industry is that in children's books, the following already being there is less important because children's books are more of an impulse buy in terms of parents are walking through the store and they see this beautiful illustration and they just grab it and they maybe discover something new. The areas where publishers absolutely have to have, like they say the author has to have a following already, is actually nonfiction. So like if you, and not children's books, I'm talking like you want to write a parenting book, you know, or you want to write a devotional or something like that. Then in traditional, they would be looking for you to have a big following already because they want to know that people are already looking to you for advice. You know, and that they trust you. With children's books, it's less that way. Now, obviously, it's always a good thing. I mean, if you have a following, that's great. But no, I didn't have, I mean, I probably had like 200 followers on Twitter or something. Like, no, I didn't have a following at all. So With
Yeah.
Kidlit, it's more about the quality of the work. And all of that stuff you hear about platform is usually more nonfiction focused. At
Well,
least
that's good to
experience.
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good to know. I watched one of your recent videos on the At Home Author channel on YouTube, and you were talking about story arcs.
Yeah.
And so you kind of explained the difference between a typical narrative fiction book story arc and a children's book story arc. And just to kind of quickly sum that up, the I guess the adult version was more like a mountaintop where
Mm-hmm.
you kind of rise to the top and you come down and it's kind of in the center, or yeah, so to speak. Whereas the story arc for children's books was a much more gradual increase, almost to the end, and then it dropped off. You can explain that a lot better than I can. But if you want to just do that quickly, you can. But
Okay.
I was wondering about your particular book here, God Made You Too, because it's not your typical story. So does
Mm-mm.
it follow the same story arc, or does it look completely different?
Yeah.
Just to kind
So there's two main types of children's books in my mind, two big categories. Narrative, which is what that video is about, and then there's concept books. And children's books have a lot of concept books, which are, I mean, at the very base level, there are things like ABC books, where the concept is the alphabet and they're showing you all these different examples of that concept. God Made You Too is a concept book. So it doesn't have a narrative story arc. It's just the concept is God's creation being amazing. And the book just gives all different examples of how God made you too in terms of other things. So it's examples of a certain concept all in a row. There's no like chronological order to the story. Narratives are, and I feel like these are easier to write. I mean, just to be honest, because you don't have to have that narrative story arc. It's just come up with a bunch of really beautiful examples of something, put them all together, and that's a concept book. My friend Amanda Flynn wrote God Made All Your Feelings. Very similar. It's, teaching kids to embrace each different feeling that they have. She's got all these verses, one about each feeling. You could really change the order of them around and it wouldn't matter. And so those I feel like are a little bit simpler to write. A narrative, which is what the video that you're talking about was about, is the traditional, like, the character has a problem or they have a conflict and then they try to solve that problem, or it gets worse and worse, or there's some kind of building of tension to a climax or changing point where they either solve the problem or they have a change of heart or they change as a person, and then the falling action. And I think that what we see at Home Author with that type of story, because it's more difficult to write, people really struggle with the two things they struggle with the most are not having a problem in the story. We get a lot of stories that are just like this wonderful day that the character has. They're like, well, I went to the park and I saw this beautiful rainbow and everything was perfect. And it's like, that's wonderful, but it's not really going to keep the kid turning the page.
Yeah.
There's nothing to get them to be like, ooh, what's going to happen next? And that's what you want. And so the key with a good story arc for a children's book is to have a conflict or a problem happen very quickly, and then spend most rising action getting that kid to turn the page and turn the page and turn the page, all the way up to the turning point should be really close to the end, because little ones like rising action. They like to know that there's something else coming on that next page. And so you want to keep them in that rising action part for as long as you can. So.
Yeah. I just want to plug my own books here now that we're approaching Christmas. I better do that. I haven't really mentioned them on the show recently, but
Yeah.
so this over here, you can't really see it well on the screen, but Ada and the Helpers was my first book, and that's a narrative story. It's got a beginning, middle, and end, and follows that traditional narrative arc. And then Never Ever Build a Blanket Fort over there. I'm trying to do this backwards. So it's a lot different, and it's a lot like if you give a mouse a cookie, or if you what's if you build a car or something like that. It's kind of these if then phrases, almost like warnings that if you do this, then this has happened, and it kind of builds like
Yeah.
that. And so would you say that kind of fits the concept, or?
It depends. I haven't read your story. I should read it. But like you mentioned, if you give a mouse a cookie, and that I think totally follows the story arc thing, because the problem is, okay, you've given this little creature a treat, and now the whole book is basically escalation. Oh, now he wants this. Now he wants this. And that's exactly that rising action. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse.
Mm-hmm.
And then the resolution is he's going to want it again. So we call that cumulative, if you want the fancy name for it. But yeah, that totally follows that story arc. So, but there are tons of books too. I mean, I say narrative and concept. There's interactive books now, there's all different ones. That's what I love about Kidlit, is that we can generalize things a little bit. And I do that as a teacher to teach people about it. But if you can come up with something totally different and new, that's the best. So
exactly. Looking for something that is different.
Yep.
So you also talked in that video about exposition, or how to sort of introduce the main character within the first page or two. So how is that different for sequels? And I'll kind of give a little bit of a background. My first book, Ada and the Helpers, I sent it to my first editor, and he came back and said I really needed to develop the introduction of the main character a little bit more. And I was a little surprised, because I thought I did a pretty good job. And so I did that a bit more before sending it to another editor. But then I'm kind of, and this is a personal question, I guess, I'm kind of stuck with writing a sequel and how to introduce the character again.
Yeah.
How does it change, do you think?
So, first of all, with picture books, I don't want to disagree with your first editor, but with picture books,
and watching before you get started, watching your video was a lot different than what I had heard from him. So go ahead and disagree. You are free.
Well, so I find that with picture books, especially, and of course trends change too. So like old school picture books did this differently. But today, I feel like we see a lot more, or kids are drawn to stories that start really quickly with the conflict. And the beauty of a picture book is that you don't need to spend text telling us what a character looks like, because they're there. We can see what, you don't have to say, Sally was a sweet little girl with blonde hair, because she's right there. We can see her. And you don't need to spend too much time describing the setting either. I've read a lot of books that start off with like a whole paragraph about this cottage in the woods and, all this description. And again, the illustrator can do that way better than we can as authors. And so we can just show the kid, this is where we're at. This is the character. Now, if there's things that aren't visual, then yeah, those need to be introduced on, on the first page or in the first part of the story to get to know that character. With sequels and picture books, I always just tell authors to think of it as if you are the writer and director of like Peppa Pig or Bluey or any of those little kid shows where each episode is a self-contained story. It has its own narrative story arc. but it has that recognizable character, that looks the same. You'll notice often that like Peppa wears the same clothes in every episode of Peppa Pig. Yeah. She never changes. And so those are the kind of things that we do in picture books to make those characters recognizable. Or maybe there's just a couple lines that sort of describe that character that we always use at the beginning. Like Peppa was a sweet little pig that lived with her mommy and daddy in whatever. Like just a very brief, like set the stage, remind the reader that this is the same character that we saw before. They're wearing the same clothes. They look, everything's the same, but give it a whole new narrative story arc, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we begin to sort of land the plane here, I want to go back to that line in your book, a light that's meant to shine. And I just love that line. And I think so many of us, especially faith-based authors, we want our light to shine, and we want it to shine through our books. And so as we are wrapping up 2023 and many authors are looking to, start the process of publishing, whether it's self-publishing or traditional publishing in the next year, do you have any encouraging words for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I truly believe there's never been a better time to start writing children's books. And I say that because self-publishing has exploded. There's, so many awesome creatives out there who can illustrate for you or help you design. There's so many resources out there. So I think there's never been a better time to get started with it. I also have found one of my books is not Christian. It's just, family friendly. It's about gardening. The other one is Christian. And so having seen both of those, there's a huge demand for Christian children's books out there. Just huge. And so I have so many people who say that they have a hard time finding well done children's books that have a Christian theme. And so I really think, whatever type of book you're wanting to write, but particularly for Christian authors, there's a huge demand, and so many different avenues to go down to make that happen. So definitely, if you've ever thought about it, now's a great time to give it a try. And I also just think, I don't know, maybe every generation feels like this, but I feel like the world is so stressed out right now. And so there's so much darkness and drama, and, you just kind of want to stop watching the news because you hear all the negatives. And writing for kids is just like food for your soul, it's so much fun to create something because you have to be in the kid's mindset. You have to think like a child, and that's fun. It's fun to come up with things. I just finished a humorous manuscript, and I had so much fun trying to come up with jokes that would make kids laugh. And that's a great way to spend your time as a creative, to give yourself some joy. So definitely encourage people to give it a try.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's just so refreshing to see books like yours that are beautifully done, sort of, getting out there and getting into the hands of kids. And, once again, we mentioned Worthy Kids and what they stand for, and producing wholesome stories, and like yours and like Kirk Cameron's, and we need more books out there, because there are so many books out there that are just garbage. And we need books out there that are wholesome, not necessarily Christian or faith-based or biblically based, but just wholesome books that raise good values.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, and that's kind of the focus. I'm a book designer. I'm also a publishing coach, and so that's kind of my focus going into this new year, is to really highlight and help those authors that want to produce wholesome books.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we did have a comment come up from
Woohoo.
Erin Moran. She had a question about finding an agent. She said, "Good
Mm.
morning, Travis and Chelsea. How important is an intro letter to an agent? And do you have any tips?"
Yeah. So when you are trying to get an agent, it's called a query letter, just terminology so that when you're Googling, you know what you're looking for. Query letter. It's super important because it's imagine yourself meeting them in person and you walk up and you introduce yourself and shake their hand. That's the query letter. So you want it to be professional, you want it to be short, but you also, it's like a picture book. You want it to be short, but you also want it to say exactly what you want it to say in the shortest amount of time. I actually, not to plug myself, but I get this question so much that I created a kit. It's called the Query Kit. And I have like my letter that got me my agent is in there. I've, video course that walks you through everything step by step and also how to find agents to query. So that's on At Home Authors website. But think of it as basically a resume. So it's going to be, and the most important part of your query letter is going to be the pitch of your story. And so it's really important to kind of hone that too, and really get down to what is the heart of your story and how can you convey that in just a couple sentences. And that is going to be what, makes them be like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then they're going to read the actual manuscript. So yeah, definitely important. And lots of resources out there. Definitely check out ours if you're interested. So.
That's really great. Erin, thank you for asking that question. It's an important question. And I'm going to get the link to that kit and put it in the
Yeah,
description. I already have the link to the Story Arcs video that we talked about in the
perfect.
description, as well as links to your books. They should be in there as well. If I haven't added those, they will be added. I can't remember now. But
Okay, that's
anyways,
fine. I'll send you the
um,
link if you need it. So
yeah. So thank you again, Erin, for asking that. And getting back to you, Chelsea, what's next? What are you working on?
um
Do you have any sneak peeks for us?
I do. Well, I have two books under contract that are coming out in 2025. I say that with a little bit of a bummer because they were scheduled for 2024 and they got bumped back a year. Publishing is slow, illustrating takes a long time. And so, and they are both, you said when we were talking earlier, we need wholesome books that don't necessarily have to be Christian or Bible based. And that's what these two are. So one of them is called Seasons on the Farm, and it's exactly what it sounds like. I grew up on a farm in Southern Illinois, and so it's rhyming and, just a really wholesome book about farm life. And then I have another one called Chalk the Walk, and it's about all the cool things that kids can do with sidewalk chalk. And so I feel like those
Oh,
are both good examples of what you're talking about, wholesome messages, that family friendly books, not necessarily Christian, but definitely in keeping with that kind of values. So those two are the next two that are coming out. And I have another one in the works that I can't talk about yet, but I'm very excited. That one will be a Christian children's book. So can't talk about it yet, but hopefully I'll have a third one under contract soon. So
well, the two you mentioned sound really great. I'm looking forward to seeing those.
me too.
And so, Chalk the Walk, is that kind of like a storyline, or is it?
Yeah, so that one is a little bit of a combination. It's mostly a concept book with like different things you can do with chalk, like different creative ideas, but it does kind of have a chronological flow because it starts with a gray city and a child with a bucket of chalk, and they kind of do each of the different, things you can do with chalk throughout the city, and at the end it's beautiful. And then it rains at the end and washes it away. And he's like, that's okay. I'll just do it again tomorrow, kind of thing. So sort of that, circular storyline. And then Seasons on the Farm would be kind of similar. Like it's mostly concept examples of the seasons, but anytime you're following the seasons, it kind of has that chronological feel to it. So yeah.
Yeah.
And they're both rhyming. Rhyming is my thing. So
yeah. How can viewers get in contact with you or find?
I am on Twitter. Oh, it's not Twitter anymore. X. I'm on
X.
whatever you want to call that website. I'm at Mrs. Tornetto there. And my website is just my name. So chelseatornetto.com. My email is just my name too. So chelseatornetto@gmail. And of course, I'm an at-home author all the time. So you can always reach me there.
Awesome. Chelsea, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been such a great conversation, a lot of great information for authors and anyone who's sort of interested in writing a children's book and getting it published. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah. Now, you are my last guest for the year as we wrap up 2023. But once again, I just want to invite any authors out there. If you would like to be a guest on the show and you already have a book published or it's coming out shortly, you can submit at launchmissioncreative.com/submissions. And I would love to have you on the show next year. I see another comment coming in. Aaron said, yes, thanks. Thank you once again. And thank you everyone for watching. And in the meantime, go and write the book. Bye.